Welcome to NibblePop Stories. Today we will hear the story of Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. Long before history learned to write itself down, when gods still spoke directly to mortals and fate walked openly among human lives, there stood a powerful city called Thebes. It was a city of high walls and proud people, ruled by King Laius and Queen Jocasta. For many years, the royal palace echoed with a single longing. There was no child to inherit the throne, no son to carry the royal blood forward. Laius and Jocasta prayed to the gods, offered sacrifices, and waited. At last, their prayers were answered. Jocasta conceived a child, and hope returned to the palace. But joy, in the world of Greek tragedy, is rarely allowed to exist without a shadow. Before the child was born, King Laius sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, the sacred voice of the god Apollo. What he received instead was a sentence of terror. The oracle declared that the son born to Laius would one day kill his own father and marry his own mother. Laius returned to Thebes, shaken to his core. The child he had prayed for was now a threat, not only to his life, but to the moral order of his household and the stability of the kingdom. When the child was born, Laius looked upon his son and found himself unable to kill him with his own hands. Yet fear overpowered love. Seeking a way to silence fate without committing direct murder, the king ordered the infant's ankles to be pierced and bound together. The wounds would scar him forever, marking him as unwanted and cursed. The child was then given to a shepherd, a servant of the palace, with a single command: take the baby to the mountains and leave him there to die, exposed to the elements and the mercy of beasts. The shepherd obeyed, at least at first. But when he reached the lonely slopes and heard the infant's cries echo against the rocks, something within him broke. He could not leave the child to die. Instead, he passed the baby to another herdsman, one who served the royal house of Corinth. That herdsman carried the child far away to King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth. They had no children of their own, and they welcomed the wounded infant with open arms. They named him Oedipus, a name born from his injury, swollen footed. Years passed. Oedipus grew strong, intelligent, and confident. He was trained as a prince, taught to rule, admired for his sharp mind and commanding presence. Yet, even in the comfort of the Corinthian court, unease followed him like a shadow. Rumors began to circulate. Some claimed that Oedipus was not truly the son of Polybus and Merope. The doubts tormented him. Finally, unable to endure uncertainty, Oedipus traveled to Delphi to seek the truth of his birth. But the god gave him no answers about his parents. Instead, the oracle delivered a prophecy meant for him alone. Oedipus was fated to kill his father and marry his mother. The words struck him like a curse. Horrified, Oedipus fled Delphi and swore never to return to Corinth. He believed Polybus and Merope were his real parents, and he would rather live in exile than bring destruction upon them. On the road toward Thebes, Oedipus came to a narrow crossroads where paths converged. There he encountered an old man riding in a chariot accompanied by servants. The old man ordered Oedipus aside. Proud and hot tempered, Oedipus refused. Insults turned to blows. The argument exploded into violence. In a flash of rage and self defense, Oedipus struck the old man down and killed his attendants. He walked away from the scene, unaware that the man he had slain was King Laius, his true father, and that the first half of the prophecy had already been fulfilled. Unburdened by knowledge, Oedipus continued toward Thebes, only to find the city locked in terror. A monstrous creature, the Sphinx, sat outside its gates, posing a riddle to all who approached. What walks on four legs in the morning, two legs at noon, and three legs in the evening? Those who failed to answer were instantly killed and devoured. Many young men of Thebes had perished this way. Trade had ceased, hope had drained away, and the city lived in constant dread, unable to free itself. When Oedipus confronted the Sphinx, he understood that the riddle was not about animals or monsters, but about human life itself. He answered, "Man, who crawls as an infant, walks upright in adulthood, and leans on a staff in old age." The answer shattered the Sphinx's power. Her riddle broken, she destroyed herself, and the terror that had strangled Thebes vanished at once. Thebes was saved. In gratitude, the people hailed Oedipus as a hero and crowned him king. They offered him the throne and the widowed queen Jocasta as his wife. Oedipus accepted, believing himself blessed by fortune at last. Years of peace followed. Oedipus ruled wisely. Jocasta stood beside him. Four children were born. Many years had passed. Under Oedipus's rule, Thebes had known peace, order, and prosperity. The king was admired for his intelligence and his firmness, for his ability to listen and decide. To the people, Oedipus was not merely a ruler, he was a savior who had earned the throne by merit, not by birth. But now that peace had collapsed. A terrible plague had descended upon Thebes. It crept through the city like a dark breath, touching everything it passed. The fields lay barren, seeds rotted in the soil before they could rise, the herds sickened and died in their pens. Women went into labor only to deliver lifeless children. The streets echoed with coughing, mourning, and prayer. Even the air itself seemed poisoned, heavy with despair. Before the royal palace, the people gathered in helpless crowds. They called out to Oedipus. Oedipus stood before his people. He told them that he shared their sorrow. The city's pain, he said, was his own, and he swore before gods and citizens alike that he would not rest until the source of the plague was found and Thebes was restored to life. Then he revealed that he had already acted. He had sent Creon, his brother in law and most trusted adviser, to seek guidance from the god Apollo. Creon had traveled to Delphi, to the sacred temple where the god's oracle spoke truths that no mortal could escape. There, Oedipus hoped, lay the answer to Thebes' suffering. As Oedipus spoke, Creon returned. The god had answered. The plague, Apollo declared, was no accident of nature, it was punishment. Long ago, King Laius, Thebes' former ruler, had been murdered. His killer had never been brought to justice. That unpunished crime had stained the land, and the stain had festered into plague. The city would not be cleansed, the god warned, until the murderer was found and driven out. The words fell heavily upon the crowd. A murderer among them, a crime hidden for years, the idea unsettled the city as deeply as the plague itself. Oedipus felt the weight of the revelation. He had ruled Thebes for years without knowing that such corruption lay at its heart. His sense of order, of rational governance was shaken. If the city suffered because of a hidden crime, then the crime must be uncovered. Before the people, Oedipus made a sacred vow. He swore that he would pursue the killer of Laius as fiercely as if the murdered king were his own father. He would search every corner of the city, question every witness, and follow the truth wherever it led. Then, with the confidence of a man who believed himself innocent and just, Oedipus pronounced a terrible curse. He declared that the murderer, whoever he might be, should live in misery and isolation, shunned by friends and strangers alike. He prayed that the man's life would wither, that no home would shelter him, no fire warm him, no community accept him. Even those who knowingly protected the killer, Oedipus warned, would share in that punishment. The words rang through the city like a judgment already passed. And then came the command. If anyone knew the truth, if anyone had seen, heard, or suspected, he must come forward. Oedipus promised safety to those who spoke honestly. Silence, he warned, would bring exile. There would be no hiding from the law or the gods. To the people of Thebes, these words brought hope. At last, their king was acting. Justice would be done. The plague would be lifted. But to the listener who knows the story, these vows carry a deeper meaning. With every word, Oedipus tightened the net around himself. With every curse he pronounced, he unknowingly condemned his own future. The killer he sought so fiercely, the criminal he vowed to banish, was already standing before them, robed in royal authority, confident in his righteousness. Thus began Oedipus's great investigation, not a search for another man's guilt, but a journey toward his own undoing. Word of Oedipus's vow spread swiftly through Thebes. Hope stirred again among the sick and the grieving. If any man could expose the truth, they believed it was Oedipus, the solver of riddles, the man who had once defeated the Sphinx with reason alone. True to his nature, Oedipus did not delay. Almost immediately, he sent for the one man in Thebes whose knowledge was said to come not from human reasoning, but from the gods themselves, Tiresias. The old prophet arrived slowly, led by a young attendant. His eyes were sightless, clouded by age and darkness, yet there was something unsettling about him. Though blind, he seemed to perceive more than any man in the court. Legends said that Apollo himself whispered truths into Tiresias' soul, truths too heavy for ordinary mortals to bear. Oedipus greeted the prophet with respect. He spoke of the plague, of Apollo's command, of the need to clean Thebes, of the hidden crime poisoning its blood. Holy seer, Oedipus pleaded, you who see what others cannot, help us. Thebes is wasting away. Tell me, who murdered King Laius so that I may cleanse this land and restore life to my people? For a long moment, Tiresias said nothing. He stood motionless, his face turned inward, as though listening to a voice only he could hear. At last, Tiresias spoke, but not with the clarity Oedipus expected. It would be better for you, the prophet said, if you did not seek this knowledge. The truth you demand will bring you nothing but ruin. The words struck Oedipus like an insult. How could truth bring ruin? His tone hardened. He pressed the prophet again, demanding answers, accusing him of withholding the truth while the city suffered. Finally, the old man's patience broke. What followed fell upon the court like a thunderclap. You are the man you seek, Tiresias said plainly. You are the murderer of King Laius. The world seemed to stop. The court fell silent, stunned. Oedipus stood frozen, his face burning with disbelief and fury. The words were absurd, impossible. He, the savior of Thebes, he, the just king who sought truth above all things. Rage surged through him. He lashed out at Tiresias, accusing the prophet of madness and treachery. How dare this blind old man insult him so openly? How dare he mock the man who had outwitted the Sphinx? Oedipus's anger quickly found a target beyond the prophet. He accused Creon, his brother in law and trusted adviser, of plotting against him. Oedipus reasoned this accusation was part of a scheme to seize the throne. Tiresias, he claimed, was merely a tool, a mouthpiece for Creon's ambition. Tiresias listened, unmoved. When he spoke again, his words were calm, almost pitying. He denied any conspiracy. He told Oedipus that power meant nothing to him, that truth alone compelled him to speak. Then he delivered his final warning. You mock my blindness, Tiresias said, but soon you will stumble through the world in darkness yourself. You have eyes, yet you do not see. The truth will reveal itself in time. With that, the prophet turned away and departed. Oedipus remained standing, shaken with rage. Creon defended himself, denying all ambition, appealing to reason and fairness. But Oedipus's mind was already at war. Suspicion had taken root. Trust began to fracture. The king who once stood confidently against monsters now found himself surrounded by invisible enemies, conspiracies, prophecies, and accusations that threatened his authority and his sense of self. Jocasta stepped forward, seeking to soothe her husband. She urged him not to take the words of prophets too seriously. Oracles, she reminded him, had been wrong before. She began to tell a story from her own past. Long ago, she said, a prophecy had come to King Laius and herself, a prophecy every bit as terrible as the one Tiresias had spoken now. The god had foretold that their son would grow up to kill his father. Horrified, Laius had taken action. Their infant child, she said, had been sent away to die. Fate, it seemed, had been defeated. And what of Laius himself? He had been killed years later, not by his son, but by strangers. Jocasta recalled the report clearly. Laius had been attacked at a crossroads, far from Thebes, by a band of robbers. His death, tragic though it was, had nothing to do with prophecy. The oracle, Jocasta insisted, had been proven false. But with each word, Oedipus felt something tightening within him. A crossroads? The word struck him like a blow. Suddenly, the palace around him faded. In its place rose a memory, vivid, sharp, and unwilling to be ignored. A narrow meeting of roads, a chariot blocking his path, an old man, proud and commanding, insults exchanged, rage ignited, violence unleashed. Blood. Oedipus felt his breath shorten. His heart pounded with a force he could not control. Carefully, almost fearfully, he began to ask questions. Where exactly had this happened? He asked. How long ago? What kind of man was Laius? How many were in his party? Jocasta answered without suspicion at first. The event, she said, had taken place years ago, shortly before Oedipus himself came to Thebes. Laius had been traveling with a small group of attendants. Only one man had survived to tell the tale. At that, Jocasta paused. She noticed the sudden paleness in her husband's face, the way his eyes seemed fixed on something far beyond her. The confidence in her voice wavered. The report, she added, hesitating slightly, said that Laius was attacked by many men, not one. Oedipus seized upon that detail like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Many men, not one. Perhaps the puzzle still held an answer that did not condemn him. Yet the fear would not leave him. He confessed to Jocasta what he had never spoken aloud before. Long ago, he said, while fleeing Corinth, he had encountered a man at a crossroads, a man who matched her description. There had been a quarrel, tempers had flared, and Oedipus had killed him. If the man he had killed was King Laius, then the curse upon Thebes had not come from some hidden criminal. It had come from its king. Silence fell between them. Jocasta tried to hold on to reason. The survivor, she reminded Oedipus, the shepherd who had witnessed Laius's death, had claimed there were many attackers. Until that man spoke again, nothing was certain. That single detail became Oedipus's last hope. If the witness confirmed his earlier account, then Oedipus might yet be innocent. If not, he did not allow himself to finish the thought. He ordered that the surviving shepherd be summoned at once. Days passed. Thebes waited for the lone shepherd who had survived the murder of King Laius. Then, one morning, the rhythm of waiting was suddenly broken. A messenger arrived at the palace gates from Corinth. He was ushered into the court where Oedipus and Jocasta awaited him. Great king, the messenger announced, I bring news from Corinth. King Polybus is dead. A murmur swept through the court. Some bowed their heads in respect, others whispered softly. Jocasta clasped her hands together, torn between grief and relief. Then she turned towards Oedipus, her eyes bright with sudden hope. Do you see, my lord? She said, her voice trembling with emotion. The oracle was false after all. You did not kill your father. Polybus had died by nature's hand, as all men must. The gods have no power over us. For Jocasta, this news felt like deliverance. At last, proof that prophecy could lie. At last, evidence that human reason and chance ruled life, not divine riddles spoken in shadows. The people too felt comforted. The terrible words spoken at Delphi seemed weaker now, their threat diminished. But Oedipus did not rejoice. His face remained dark, his expression grave. He accepted the news, but not its comfort. Perhaps, he said slowly, But the prophecy spoke of two crimes, not one. My father's death may be explained, but my mother still lives. While Queen Merope breathes, the fear of that fate remains. The court grew quiet again. It was then that the messenger revealed more. Then set your heart at ease, my king, he said. You have nothing to fear from that prophecy. Merope is not your mother, nor was Polybus your father. The words struck like a sudden wind. Oedipus stared at the messenger, stunned. Jocasta froze, her hands slowly lowering to her sides. Seeing their confusion, the old man continued. He spoke plainly, unaware that each sentence was pulling loose the final threads of their world. Long ago, he explained, he had been a herdsman. One day, while tending his flocks near Mount Cithæron, he had been given a baby, a child abandoned on the mountainside, its ankles pierced and bound together. The sight had stirred his pity. Unable to leave the infant to die, he had carried him to Corinth. King Polybus and Queen Merope, childless and longing for an heir, had welcomed the baby gladly and raised him as their own. As the messenger spoke, silence fell upon the court. Not the silence of calm, but of recognition. Jocasta's face drained of color. Her body stiffened as though struck by a blow no one else could see. Oedipus felt his heart pound violently in his chest. Slowly, with trembling hands, he lifted his robe and looked down at his ankles. The scars were still there, faint, ancient, but unmistakable. Marks that had followed him all his life, now transformed into living evidence. The messenger noticed his reaction and added one final detail, almost casually. The child, he said, was given to me by a shepherd from Thebes, a servant of King Laius' household. The world seemed to tilt. Oedipus's voice shook as he spoke again. Bring this man to me, he commanded. Bring the shepherd at once. There was no doubt left in him now. The truth was no longer distant or abstract. It stood at the threshold, waiting for one final voice to speak. But Jocasta could bear no more. The realization had reached her before it reached Oedipus. Her certainty was complete and unbearable. She begged him to stop. For the love of gods, she cried, her voice breaking, ask no more questions. Do not seek to know who you are. It is enough. Her words were desperate, raw, stripped of royal dignity. She was a woman pleading for escape from a truth too monstrous to endure. But Oedipus could not stop. His life had been shaped by inquiry. Reason had saved Thebes once before. He believed it would save him again. Truth, he believed, was always better than ignorance. To turn away now would be to betray himself. I must know, he said. Jocasta looked at him one last time. Then, unable to face what was coming, she turned and fled into the palace. Oedipus remained behind. He stood alone in the court, surrounded by witnesses, waiting for the final shepherd, the man whose testimony would complete the riddle of his life. The city around him seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind felt hushed, as though the world itself sensed that something final was about to be spoken. Oedipus stood rigid, his body tense, his thoughts in chaos. Every path of his life, every road, every choice, every escape had narrowed to this single moment. The shepherd was coming. At last, the shepherd entered. He was old and bent, his face deeply lined by years of sun and labor. His clothes were plain, his hands rough, his staff shaking slightly as he walked. He bowed low before the king, unaware of the weight gathering around him. Oedipus spoke first. You were once a servant of King Laius, he said. Answer me this. Did you ever give a child to a Corinthian herdsman, a child whose feet were bound? The shepherd did not answer. He lowered his head. Before the shepherd could speak, the Corinthian messenger stepped forward. This is the man, he said firmly. He gave me the child. I swear it by the gods. The shepherd's body stiffened. Fear flickered across his face like a sudden shadow. Why question me about such things? He muttered. What good can come of it now? But Oedipus could not be turned aside. He stepped closer, seized the old man by the shoulders, and forced him to look up. Speak, Oedipus commanded. You will not die by my hand if you speak the truth, but by the gods, if you lie or hold back, I will break you. At last, the shepherd broke. Yes, he said, his voice faltering, shattered. Yes, the child was Laius's. Each word fell slowly like a blow. The queen, Jocasta, gave him to me. She ordered me to destroy him. A gasp rippled through the court. But I could not, the shepherd said, sobbing now. I pitied the baby. I could not kill him, so I gave him to this man from Corinth, hoping the child would live, hoping the gods would forget. Oedipus staggered backward. The strength drained from his body as though the words had struck him physically. His face emptied of color. His mind raced, but there was nowhere left to run. Everything aligned at once. The prophecy spoken to Laius, the infant abandoned on the mountain, the scars on his ankles, the crossroads, the old man in the chariot, the marriage to Jocasta, the children born in the palace. The truth tore through him with merciless clarity. The man he had killed on the road was his father. The woman he had loved and slept beside was his mother. The children he adored were born of an unspeakable crime. A cry burst from Oedipus's throat. It was raw, broken, primal, a sound torn from the deepest place of the soul where reason no longer reaches. The servants recoiled in horror. Some turned away, others wept openly. The king who had once stood before them as a savior now stood exposed as both the curse that poisoned Thebes and the greatest victim of its fate. Oedipus understood now what Tiresias had meant. He had eyes, but he had never truly seen. He had hunted truth with fierce devotion, believing knowledge to be salvation. He had trusted reason above all else, convinced that wisdom could master destiny, and in doing so, he had fulfilled the very fate he tried to escape. The riddle of his life was complete. It had not been spoken by the Sphinx, it had been written by fate itself. Oedipus had answered it not once, but again and again, at Delphi, at the crossroads, in the palace, until there was nothing left to uncover. The shepherd collapsed in tears. The messenger stood frozen. The court remained silent. Oedipus stood alone. He had sought truth with purity of heart. He had refused comfort, denied illusion, and demanded certainty at every step. And now that truth stood before him, naked, undeniable, and merciless. In finding it, he had lost everything that made life bearable: joy, identity, hope, home. What remained was knowledge and a darkness deeper than blindness. Inside the palace, silence gathered like a living thing. It pressed against the walls, crept through the corridors, and settled heavily in the chambers where Jocasta stood alone. Even before the shepherd's confession was complete, she had understood. The fragments had already assembled themselves in her mind with dreadful clarity. The child she had once given away, marked for death to save her husband, had lived. The prophecy she had mocked, dismissed, laughed away as meaningless words had come true in every detail. The man she had loved as a husband, ruled beside as queen, and borne children with, was her son. The realization struck her with a force beyond grief. It was not sorrow alone that consumed her, but shame so vast it felt unbearable. There was no escape left for her, no denial, no comfort, no gods to blame, no time to undo what had been done. With a sound torn from the deepest place of despair, a cry too broken to be heard by others, Jocasta turned and fled. She moved through the palace blindly, her hands brushing walls she no longer recognized. Servants called after her, but she did not stop. She vanished into the inner chambers of the palace, where memory and guilt waited. Not long after, another sound broke the heavy stillness. A messenger burst into the court. "The queen!" he cried, struggling to breathe. "The queen is dead!" A collective moan rose from the palace like a funeral cry. "She has hanged herself," the messenger continued, his voice breaking. "She could not endure what had been revealed." The words spread through the court like a cold wind. The horror deepened. Fate, it seemed, was not yet finished exacting its price. When Oedipus heard the news, something within him shattered completely. He cried out Jocasta's name not once, but again and again, his voice filled with terror, grief, and a love that had now become unbearable. He rushed into the palace, stumbling through corridors he could no longer truly see. At last, he reached her chamber. There she hung, still, silent, her body lifeless, suspended by twisted cords. Her face was pale, drained of warmth, frozen in an expression beyond suffering. The woman who had once been queen of Thebes now hung alone, defeated by truth. Oedipus fell beside her. He gathered her body into his arms, rocking her as though she were still alive, as though grief alone might undo death. His cries filled the chamber. He called her wife, he called her mother, he called her beloved. Each word spoken aloud struck him like a curse. Unable to endure the sight, unable to endure himself, Oedipus's grief turned inward against his own existence. His gaze fell upon the golden pins that fastened Jocasta's robes, symbols of her rank, her beauty, her former dignity. With a cry that echoed through the palace, he tore them free. Then, in an act of terrible resolve, he drove them into his eyes. Blood burst forth, streaming down his face, staining his robe, splashing onto the floor like dark rain. Again and again he struck, screaming as pain consumed him. "No more light," he cried, "no more eyes to look upon this horror, this sin, this ruin I have brought upon myself." Darkness, he believed, was the only punishment equal to his crimes. At last, when the strength left him, he collapsed. Time passed. No one knew how long. When Oedipus finally emerged from the palace, he was scarcely recognizable. His eyes were gone, his face streaked with blood and tears, his body bent beneath a weight heavier than any crown. Slowly he raised his hands, feeling the air as though it were a new and unfamiliar world. His voice, when he spoke, trembled, but it carried the full weight of truth. All I see now, he said, is what I was blind to before my cursed birth, the crimes my own hands committed in ignorance, the shame that stains my children, their mother, and my name. Stripped of crown, sight, and certainty, Oedipus now understood himself fully, not as a king, not as a hero, but as a human being bound by fate, capable of error, and willing to bear responsibility for what he had done. Only when he lost his eyes did he truly see. Before him stood Creon, Jocasta's brother, his grief held firmly beneath restraint. The people parted at his gesture. Creon, Oedipus said, you know what the gods have declared. The land is cleansed only when the murderer is driven away. Do not delay justice, exile me. He paused, drawing a painful breath. Send me to the mountains of Cithaeron, the place where my life should have ended before it began. Let me vanish from this city. Let Thebes live. Creon did not answer at once. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, touched with sorrow. You will not be cast away yet, he said. Even in your suffering, you are not beyond the care of the gods. We must wait for Apollo's will to be made clear. He turned to the attendants and ordered that Oedipus's wounds be treated, that his bleeding be stopped, but Oedipus recoiled. No hands can cleanse what I have done, he said softly. No comfort can undo the truth. Let me suffer. It is all that remains to me. His strength was fading now, his body swayed, weakened by pain and exhaustion. And then, as though remembering something precious he was about to lose forever, he spoke again. One mercy, he said. Grant me this, Creon. Let me see my daughters. Creon nodded. Soon Antigone and Ismene were led forward. When they reached their father, they clung to him, sobbing. Oedipus dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around them, drawing them close. His hands moved gently over their hair, their faces, as though trying to carve their features into his memory. My children, he whispered, his voice breaking, born of horror, yet innocent of all guilt. Tears streamed down his ruined face. My curse will follow you, he said. Wherever you go, men will see not who you are, but who your father was. Doors will close, whispers will rise. No man will dare take you as his wife, for shame clings to my house like a shadow. His body trembled as he drew them closer. Oh, my little ones, he cried. Would that I had died before I saw you born to sorrow. The children wept into his robes, unable to understand the full meaning of his words. Creon stepped forward gently and took the girls by the hand. Enough, he said, not unkindly. You have suffered enough. You may no longer command, but you will not be abandoned. When the gods speak clearly, I will act. Oedipus bowed his head. He no longer resisted. The fire that had once driven him, the hunger to know, to decide, to master fate, had burned itself out. What remained was acceptance. Slowly he was led back toward the palace. He did not look back. Thus ended the tale of Oedipus Rex. The tragedy of Oedipus, does not warn us against seeking truth. It wants us to remember who we are while we seek it. For wisdom without humility, knowledge without limits, and sight without understanding can lead even the greatest among us into darkness. And I leave you with the question: is it worthwhile to seek the truth? Are you up for it, even knowing that it might end in punishment? Or is it really, truly worth it to fight for it? It is up to you to decide. Leaving you with this question, I, Monami Mukherjee, is signing off now. Good night.